welcome. Looking forward to this evening, and it's the fourth of the topics this evening, and so we're going to be talking about things like the principles of handling, some personal protection. This will be you in your armour. That's really how you'll be. Some tools of the trade. There you've got a bee brush, so a smoker, some smoker fuel, and a hive tool. So we're going to talk a little bit about opening the hive, and it's very much a taster this evening. When we are actually able to do the practical classes, it'll all become much clearer, and it's very difficult to talk about such a practical thing just on in a Zoom presentation. And when we do open the hive, what you'll be looking for, and if you have a look there, you may even be able to spot a beautiful queen. So have a quick look, see if you could spot her. She's quite nice and easy. She's really quite central. So there's a very nice queen there. And we'll talk about swarming. These are some queen cells. You remember that the queen cells hang down. They've got that peanut dimpled appearance. These ones are sealed. And there are several reasons why they make queen cells, not only swarming, and we'll be talking a little about those, but when you open a hive and you see those, you find you've really got to do something. Right, so your personal requirements, some basic essentials. Are you going to wear a veil, a suit, or a jacket? It's largely about personal preference and cost, but almost certainly the suit, being an all-in-one thing with a veil, gives you the greatest protection and the greatest peace of mind. And we would suggest that's probably what you should be thinking of if you feel you can afford it. And you might want to cut a dash in a baseball hat, because it really does, the brim really does stop the veil being blown against your face by the wind, and the bees then can actually sting you through the veil. So having a baseball cap on it can be very handy at times. And you'll need your wellies. We live in Somerset, so everybody has got wellies, and you really do want to wear them. Bees, a bit like terrier dogs, they love to have a nip at your ankles, and you can get stung around your ankles surprisingly easily. So Wellington boots really are important. And you're almost certainly going to want to wear some gloves, and we would certainly suggest that you do. There are people who do their bees without gloves on, but this is because they're experienced, and they feel that their hands obviously are more sensitive and subtle without a covering on, and they prefer not to use them. But I would seriously suggest that you do wear gloves. And do have a mobile phone there. Have it turned on and in an outer pocket. If you get into difficulties, if something goes wrong and you've got to call for help, then it's got to be on the outside of your bee suit. Otherwise you've got to root around in the suit and get even more bees in it. So have a mobile phone there. And you'll need your hive tool, a smoker and some smoker fuel, and some matches or a working lighter in order to light it. And in a little bucket, a little container, you have a washing soda solution. It's the sort of washing soda, the soda crystals you can actually buy when you go into Tesco or a shop, and it acts as a antibacterial thing. It's actually very alkaline, and it just kills any germs, and it stops you moving germs, bacteria, viruses, what have you, from one hive to the other. So bee veils. So here's some elderly people all by some hives, no doubt having a good bee outing by the looks of it, but obviously not wearing a lot. And here we have perhaps an Edwardian lady. She has got her veil on, but obviously, I imagine, no doubt she had to wear some copious Victorian bloomers so that she didn't get bees going up her skirt, but she does have a veil. So here we have someone looking very determined in a veil. They've actually got a boiler suit on, which is quite good to go under a veil. And obviously there are different types of veils, but you can have really quite a high level of protection with a system like this. And it's obviously comparatively cheap. And here we have someone who, again, in a veil, and it's just fitting in over their ordinary clothes. Obviously, they're not even wearing gloves. They're obviously a very experienced beekeeper and feel completely comfortable. They know the character of their bees. And so he hasn't got a lot of protection on. So how about a bee jacket? So this is something which obviously covers the top half of you, and it's integrated with the veil. So there's fewer gaps for bees to get in. You've got your ordinary trousers on underneath, and of course your wellies. Do wear your wellies, and so that's another option. And here's a different jacket, obviously with a veil, and they've got some gloves on as well, so they're pretty well protected. So if you go to a full suit, this one looks a little bit washed out, but you can see it's a complete full suit. It's got a veil attached. He's got gloves on with gauntlets, and no doubt somewhere down there's a pair of wellies. So he's got really a nice level of protection. And here we have one from a different angle, a different color. And the modern bee suits, they actually come in a wide range of pastel colors. And you can make quite a fashion statement if you want to. And so let's have a look at a few colors. So, yeah, you can really make a fashion statement. And what we do is we actually, after the course, for those who are interested, we do actually take names and orders, and by getting a mass order with BBware, we can actually get some very nice reductions. So there are other options. If you're ready for jungle warfare, you can go like this. And if you're a serious show-off, you might like to dress like this when you go to your bees. The great thing about the one on the right is that you certainly no one ever loses you. Although, you know, the one on the left, presumably people do. But if you really want to stand out and get yourself talked about, then I would go for the one on the right. So BBware is just the company that we tend to deal with. We're not on commission, but we have, Stu actually is very good at negotiating reductions. And when we place an order, we can usually get 15% off. And sometimes when we've put in a really large order, we've even squeezed a tiny bit more. But if you are interested later on, then, and you want a full suit and you've got all these color options, then, you know, you can consider that. Last year, it was rather fun that when we took delivery, it was at the beginning of one of the first sessions of the practical class, and everybody turned up and they put their new suits on, and we had a professional photographer there who said he was going to do some photographs for the big national newspapers, and with backlighting out in the apiary, a load of us were all photographed, all trying to look as if we were doing something with bees. And it was a great picture, and the next day it appeared not only in the Sunday, no, the Times on Monday, but also in the Guardian. So you know, if you want to appear in the national press, who knows, it might even happen again.
Wasn't last year, of course.
So, and the cost of a standard suit is £122.99, and if we can get the 15% off, then it's down to 104. And if we get it down, there's no package, post and package, so that saves another £8. So gloves. The thing about gloves in the old days, when I first started, the thing to get were kid leather gloves. They're very expensive, and when they're clean and new, they're lovely. But they are very difficult to clean. They're very difficult to sterilize, and they're quite a good way of spreading disease. And if you see the picture on the right, after a while, they pick up all sorts of wax and propolis and goodness knows what, and they become hard and coarse, and your hands are rather clumsy in them. And so you tend to clunk around in the bees and upset them. So we would seriously suggest that you don't buy leather gloves. You can actually get thin vinyl or latex disposable gloves. And in terms of cross-infection control, you know, something that you only use once is particularly good. But obviously you can get stung through those. The bees can just about get through. And so for a lot of people like myself, what I tend to do is have some marigolds. And in fact, what I usually have as one of my Christmas presents, they give me a pack of 10 sets of marigolds, and throughout the season I progressively use them for so long and then discard them. So, and you can get gloves with these nice gauntlets, with these arm protectors, and it means that the bees can't get up your sleeve, and that can be very nice. And it's really weighing the difference between, if you have really rather thick gloves, then obviously your hands are clumsy and you tend to be clumsy and annoy the bees. Or if you have very thin gloves, your hands are much more sensitive, but you are that much more likely to get stung. Now, for someone like me who's had bees for nearly 50 years, occasionally getting stung doesn't worry me. But, you know, particularly when you're beginning and you're a little bit nervous and what have you, it's a bit upsetting if you start getting stung. And then you can get these separate washable gauntlets that go over, and you can give them a good wash every now and again, and they're quite nice too. So what not to wear when you go to do your bees? Do take it all seriously. Some people always seem to be a little bit like, oh, I want to be their friend, and so they won't sting me. And in fact, they will. So don't wear flip-flops or sandals or anything that leaves a gap between feet and the suit. We had a very nasty, well, we thought it was nasty moment at the apiary a couple of years ago when a lady who had bees for a little while came to something we were doing, and she said, oh, I'm not going to wear my wellies. They're very tight on my legs and I don't like it. And so I'm just going to wear some boots. And she got some like walking boots. And she did get stung on the ankle, and we were really concerned because she started having all sorts of symptoms, and we wondered whether in fact she was going to have an anaphylactic shock reaction. She was starting to get hot and sweaty, anxious, and she was beginning to get a full body rash, and these are all signs of a potential anaphylactic shock. It all worked out all right, and it ended happily. But, you know, since then, we've been very nervous about anybody who says they don't want to wear a pair of wellies. If you wear lots of aftershave, heavy deodorants, perfumes, if your clothes have got scented fabric, softener, and some scented sun cream on, they're all chemicals, often which slightly can mimic some of the actual alarm pheromones, and they really do seem to upset the bees much more than you would think. So, you know, if you're going to the bees, don't get yourself all glammed up with lots of scent and aftershave and what have you. Oops, I'm pressing a key and nothing's happened. So why is that? Oh, right. So, And fun enough, if you're all hot and sweaty, that again, there's one of the chemicals in perspiration. I know ladies don't sweat, they glow, but if you're inclined to glow on a hot summer's day, the bees actually, one of the chemicals in perspiration is again not dissimilar to one of the alarm pheromones. So you know, you can have, and if you wear fluffy clothes, they presumably think you're a great big woolly bear that's come to pinch their honey, and they love having a go at the fluffy clothing. And that's why something like a boiler suit or a complete bee suit is a really good idea. So a few basic precautions. Never take chances, always wear a veil. And we do mean that. When you go to your bees, the old adage was that, you know, it's got to be like the sort of day you can walk down the garden in the shirt sleeves and you don't feel cold. Bees will be flying from about 11 degrees centigrade, but you know, you want the sort of day where you're comfortable in shirt sleeves, and that's when you open up the bees. You don't want to chill them. You can chill the brood. And so, you know, unless there was some dramatic reason why you had to do it, don't go in when it's colder. And they really don't like thundery, overcast, windy weather and rain. I had a classic moment. Everybody sometimes in their beekeeping career does something really silly. I cycled back from work. I was still in my tracksuit. I just put a veil on. I was, as I say, hot and sweaty. The tracksuit was a sort of electric blue, which is a color they don't like. It was very thundery, and so, but I was just something I just wanted to do, and so really foolishly, I opened up the hive. The bees set about me. My veil actually rode up because on the tracksuit I hadn't got a sort of collar that I could tuck it under, and I think I took about 40, 60 stings to the head and neck, and I must admit I managed to close them up. And I did wonder, I wasn't quite sure that I'd make it home or whether I'd pass out in the street. But anyway, I got home and lay down and seemed to be combing stings out of my hair for the next couple of days. So, you know, don't be silly like I did on that occasion, and avoid doing those sorts of things. And when you handle the frames, you're trying to be nice and smooth. Avoid jerks and bumps. You know, bees will tolerate you very, very well. But if you're crashing and banging about, you know, it is calculated to upset them. And I know this sounds a funny thing to say, is know where your hive is. You think, well, of course I know where it is. I'd be standing beside it. But if you did have a mishap, then you've got to, you know, get help. Perhaps you've got to dial 999 because you're really not feeling well. And you've actually got to be able to describe where you are in detail to a stranger when you're not feeling at all well. So obviously if it's in your back garden, that's fine. But if it's in a farmer's field, you know, some way away, you've got to give detailed instructions to someone when you're not feeling well. So wherever you've got your bees, know the postcode, know the grid reference. And those of you may be familiar, there's an app which is called What 3 Words, and everywhere in the world is split up, I think it's into 3-meter squares. And with three words, every square in the world can have a unique 3-word code. And you can go on the app or you can do it on the website. You can find out exactly where your hive is, and the emergency services are actually familiar with what 3 words. So if you've got a hive, you know, in a field out of sight and miles away, then it could possibly be very useful. And you might find the grid reference finder very helpful. And as I say, the what 3 words is available as well. And don't forget the mobile phone, and keep it accessible and already turned on. And if you can check in advance that you've got some coverage, it might save you some embarrassment. Having said that, you know, you mustn't expect that every time you go near a beehive, it's likely to be a drama. Of course, it's not. It very rarely is a drama, but you've got to be prepared for that moment when things actually go wrong. It may not even be your fault, but something has gone wrong, and you know, you've got to be able to deal with it. Now, here's a man who takes his beekeeping seriously. He's been on the course. He knows exactly what he should be wearing, and you can see he's just about to open up the top of his hive, and you can't help feeling here is a man who's just about to be stung. So try not to do that. Now, your smoker. Here's a smoker. You'll come to love your smoker. It's made up of 2 main parts. There's the part which is the bellows, which puffs the smoke, where I'm pointing with my cursor now. And then the main belly of it here, where you put the smoker fuel in. And here's the nozzles. And so, right. So, and of course, in your smoker, you've got to have some fuel. There are lots and lots of things which people use. Rotten wood, all dry, carpenter's wood chips and what have you. I tend to use corrugated cardboard, or you've just got to be a little bit careful that some of them, some of it that's available commercially actually is treated with chemicals, obviously fire-resistant chemicals, and it's quite difficult to get something to burn that's coated in fire-resistant chemical. Hessian sacking is good. Someone was saying that a great place to get sacks is Chinese restaurants. They get through no end of them with the rice, and you can get sacks for free. If you've got farm animals, the sheep grass nuts is a really good food once you've got the smoker going. And obviously there are other things that people say is dried lavender prunings, which must smell lovely, and also pine needles, nice and dry, of course, and they're nice and resinous and tend to. So there's our smoker. That's in the neutral position. So you take the top off, you put some, you get something to start it burning, and then you can load in some fuel. I mean, this is just a rather overloaded, but it's to make the point. You've got some wood chip, and then you puff away at the bellows, and whoops, put the lid on, and you've got smoke coming out of it, and you puff that at the bees. Now, the reason you do this is that it really placates the bees, and that it stops them from getting agitated. In the old days, the nice sort of cuddly story that was told was that all the bees all think there's a forest fire. They're going to have to fly off and find a new home in case their tree burns down, and therefore they go and fill themselves up with honey. And rather like us, when we've had our Christmas dinner, they feel nice and full, and so without any difficulty, they're ready to fly out. And obviously, when they're nice and full, that they tend to be very amiable. That which I thought was rather a nice story is rather poo-pooed these days. And if you take any of the bee exams in a year or two, the thing is that it actually masks all the different pheromones that the bees might give off, and the alarm pheromones, and so you know they don't react to your presence. And most times, if you give a little bit of smoke in the entrance of the hive, that bees are quite happy. They hardly seem to know that you're there, and you can enjoy opening up your bees and having a really good look. So when you're preparing to open the hive, Light your smoker. Oh, you'll think, oh, that was easy. Here's someone who thought it was going to be easy. So that's really not how to do it, but it's just making the point that actually getting it going well isn't always easy. Make sure it's going well, and then you'll find it's gone out and you've got to relight it, and you have another go. So you check the entrance and you go to puff some smoke in, and you find it's gone out and you relight your smoker again. So we're just priming you with the idea that there is a little bit of a knack to keep your smoker alight, but hopefully we'll be able to run the practical classes later on. And this is just all the stuff we show you. And like most things, there's a little bit of a knack to it, but you'll get the hang of it, and it will be fine. You'll probably say, well, how much smoke do we have to put in the entrance? And to be really annoying, the answer is, well, as much as you need, which isn't what you want to hear. But the honest truth is that when you become more confident and experienced, you'll tend to find you use a lot less smoke. But perhaps, you know, when you start, just for your benefit as much as the bees, give perhaps a dozen puffs in the front of the hive in the entrance. So you smoke the entrance, puff it in, and you're ready to go. So you ask yourself, why do we open up the beehives? Why don't we, you know, let them get on with it themselves? They know best, and let nature take its course. But it's really not quite as simple as that. So you want to ensure that the bees are healthy and prospering. You want to know how the queen's getting on. You'd like to check for pests, parasites, and diseases. And are they just about to start swarming? So are they just about to, you know, embarrass you when they fly onto your neighbour's washing, and you've got to go round and scoop up bees from their underwear hanging on the wash line? Happened to me once, but you know, it doesn't happen that often, but it always seems to be the person you least want to embarrass. So you could check for stores and whether they've got any honey, and the general state of the hive and how it's all going. So this is just a video at the entrance. You can see some of the bees are bringing in pollen, which is a good sign. You'll see them. There's one with pollen going in on its back legs. There's the workers. You've got some guard bees there. They're guarding the entrance and only letting in bees from their own colony. There's some more pollen going in. You can learn a lot from just watching at the front of the hive. If they're taking in pollen, it's very, very likely indeed that actually that the queen is laying, they're feeding larvae, and everything looks well. So you saw the bees carrying pollen. There were some guard bees there guarding the entrance. And well, there weren't actually wasps, but they were guarding against wasps, which is one of the reasons there. And one of the things you can sometimes see at the entrance is if the bees are unwell, if they've got various diseases, you can actually see some brown staining around the entrance. And that would tell you that, you know, perhaps you've got to have a look, see what's going on. Or you may even see bees with deformed wings there. And we're talking about disease next week, and there are numerous viruses which can cause deformed wings, and some of those will be actually crawling bees. They can't fly, so a bee that can't fly is a pretty sad bee, and you can see this sort of thing at the entrance. There's a very nice book by someone written a long time ago now by a German by the name of Storch, and it's at the hive entrance, and he spent much of his time just sitting watching his bees and all the various things you could learn. So you're going to prepare to open the hive. You ask yourself, what is it I'm trying to do? What is it, why am I doing this? How am I going to achieve what I want to do? Have I got all the kit? It's not too bad if you're at home and your kit's in the shed about 10 paces away. But if you're going out to your bees, say on a farmer's field, and you suddenly find you haven't got what you need, it really can be an awkward moment. So what are you going to do if you find queen cells? What extra equipment might I then need?
Light the smoker and approach the hive from the rear or the side. Blow 3 to 4 puffs of smoke towards the entrance and wait for about 3 minutes for this to take effect. Standing at the rear of the hive, slowly lift the roof. Always remember to handle the hive calmly and avoid shaking or any noise that could disturb the bees. Place the roof upside down on the floor near the hive with the underside facing skywards. Using the hive tool, slowly lift the crown board. Always look on the underside for the queen. If she is there, then gently brush her onto the brood box and continue.
Super.
Place on top of the roof, right way around. If your hive has a super, then you can casually look from above to see how many of the frames the bees are working on. Lift the super and place it on top of the crown board. Use the smoker again if there are lots of bees on the top of the hive. If there is a queen excluder, use the hive tool to gently prise it off. People use a dummy frame in place of the first frame to prevent this from happening. Inspect the frame and place it on the floor, resting up against the side of the hive. Remove the second frame and inspect it. Replace it where the first frame previously was. Continue sequentially. When you've finished the inspection, carefully shuffle the frames back into their original position. Pick up the first frame and place it back into the gap. Start closing the hive up by first replacing the queen excluder. If you have a honey super, replace it on top of the queen excluder. Try and be mindful of crushing as few bees as possible. Replace the crown board and roof. When you've finished your inspection, it's very important that you give your tools a thorough clean. This will prevent the spread of disease, helping to maintain a healthy colony.
So there's a little first steps of what you might do when you're opening it up. Obviously, hopefully we'll be able to do the practical course, and so long as the lockdown arrangements permit it. And obviously these are all things that we go over and we demonstrate, and you get a chance to have a go, with us. So your hive tools, and most hive tools are in stainless steel. The old traditional shape of them tended to be that. I must admit, I got my one I got back in 1972, I think it was, and it had it for a great many years, and then, well, still have it. And I did then get another one, and you can see this is a J-shaped hive tool, which is quite useful, and you will see that in action in a moment. So this is something without any bees, but just to give you the idea of how the hive tools can be used. So you can use that to lift it up as well. And this is the next one, shows you the use of the J-type tool. So you can get it very nicely under there and then lift it out. So it's just demonstrating how you might use the hive tool, and you can lift it out. No bees, of course, in that one. So in the brood box, these are the sort of questions that you want to ask yourself. Is the queen present? And because things are getting a bit out of hand if she isn't. So how can we tell? Well, obviously the thing is, if you see the queen, it's much easier, she's there. But where she's perhaps one, albeit a very important one, out of some thousands, it can be difficult to see, and obviously that's why we mark them. But if we look here at a bit of comb, if you look down into it, you'll see the eggs. And you remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about this, and the queen lays the egg, stands up nice and straight to start with, slowly tends to fall over and hatches on the third day. So if you've got eggs present, you don't need to see the queen to know that she's been there very, very recently, and almost certainly, the queen is doing what she needs to do and everything's okay. So whatever you say, you always feel better if you see the queen. You feel you've done it properly somehow. But if you can see eggs and brood and everything is in harmony and everything looks fine, then she's obviously there, but you may not have seen her. So you want to look at the brood. There's going to be eggs, and we've just seen eggs. And if we look down on the right hand side, you can see the larvae, nice and white, pearly white, in a nice position, curled round in an even position. You can see the segmentation. They're a little bit like Michelin men. They've got their segmentation of their bodies. And here that you remember we talked about previously, on the 9th day, they're sealed over so that they can pupate, just as a caterpillar has to turn into a butterfly and has to pupate, that they've got to turn into a bee, and they're sealed over, they're capped there, and that's a mixture of wax and pollen. And because there's pollen there as well, the air can diffuse through, so that the larvae, as they turn into adult bees, actually don't suffocate. So is that an awful lot of drone brood? As we say, there's no drones in the hives at all at the moment over the winter, but there'll be 200 or 300 in most colonies over the summer. But one of the problems you keep a lookout for is that if a queen gradually is running out of sperm to fertilize her eggs, and you remember when we talked about it, an egg which is going to become a drone, a male, isn't fertilized, so it has half the chromosomes of a worker. If the queen is running out of sperm in her spermatheca, she starts laying lots and lots and lots of drones, and eventually she can just be a drone laying queen. Are there adequate stores? Pollen and honey. You can see that the pollen is here, and there's some honey here glistening. It's not actually capped, but it's not quite ready. They haven't got the water levels down to about 18% yet, but there's certainly stores there. Excuse me, coughing, just having a drink. Are there any signs of disease? Now remember what we like to see in our larvae, that they're lovely pearly white, they're in a good natural posture, curled up, and you can see the segments. And here you can see something that has gone fundamentally wrong. You can see if we look here obviously that larvae is in an unnatural posture. It's almost certainly died. It's going a funny color, and you can't see the segmentation. And if you see that, then your heart should quite rightly sink, because there's a very good chance that you've got a disease called European foul brood, and it's a notifiable disease, and it's very likely that your bees will have to be destroyed by the bee inspectors, and you have a legal obligation to inform the bee inspectors of your concerns. Having said that, I've had bees now for, well, I think it's 49 years, and I've never had European foul brood, but there is a certain amount of it about in Somerset, so it's a risk you have to be aware of. Any signs of intruders? Well, this you might think looks a bit strange. This webbing, almost like a spider's web, is produced by the wax moth. There's both the lesser and the greater wax moth, and they lay eggs, and their larvae are like little maggots, and they spin this web so the bees can't throw the larvae out, and you end up with this terrible mess. And gradually their little larvae, they actually want to eat the old comb. There's lots of fecal remains from the bee larvae, which is their food. They're not interested in honey or even in clean comb. They want dirty old comb, and that usually the bees can deal with this. But if there's a very weak colony or there's something wrong, sometimes the wax moth can really run riot, and you can have a real problem. It's more often a problem of stored comb, old comb that is stored. You'll see in the next slide. Whoops. Can you see, if you look down between the frames, completely clogged and filled with that webbing, and the wax moth larvae are in there, they're eating all the comb. And this was still, in fact, you can see there's quite a lot of the wax moth adults up there in the lid that you can see, and it's an absolutely disastrous situation, and it's usually something which happens when you're storing comb, particularly if it's not. So we've opened it up, and you're confronted with a comb, and you're thinking, gosh, goodness me, what can I see? And at first, of course, there's so much going on that you don't know quite what you're seeing. But have a look, see if you think you might see the queen. She's marked red, and she, to my eyes, but as I say, I've been doing it for a while. You know, I think you may well be able to see her. She's got the red dot on her back. So have a quick little look to see if you think you might be able to see her. All right, so let's, there she is. Looks a lovely queen. So some of the other things that we've got some sealed brood. We've talked about that before. Can you see this big area of sealed brood where the larvae are going through metamorphosis and they're turning into adults? They're sealed on the 9th day, and they come out on the 21st for the workers. So can we see any drones? I'd be impressed if you can see any drones. I looked and I couldn't, so you know, I'm a hostage to fortune now. Hopefully one of you can point out something I couldn't see. But if we have a look, we've got some drone brood. Do you remember when we talked about the drone broods? The drones, because they're bigger, the cells are bigger. And there's just a couple of cells, or 3 in all, and so there's a little bit of drone there. So this is, you know, all the things that are going through your mind when you go through your hive. Oh yeah, and we've got some pollen. Not a lot, not easy to see, but we've looked at pollen previously. Oh yeah, you can see just there, it's slightly orangey. One of the nice things you can do is that you can get some cards which show you all the characteristic colors of pollen, and you can work out what your bees have been foraging on. Sometimes of the year, like the spring, there seems to be an awful lot of yellow pollen, and if you really get into it, there's a very nice book called Pollen Loads of the Honeybee by Dorothy Hodges, and it was her PhD thesis, I think, was the origin, and she can you can really look at great detail. Right, so we've looked at the queen being marked, or rather we've looked at the one that has already been marked, and you have actually seen this a little bit before. I think it was in week 1. So it makes her easy to find, and if you can find her, you're much less likely, you know, to squash her or do something like that. And you make the mark on the back, on the thorax only. You don't want it anywhere else. You don't want to dunk her in a pot of paint. What you use is one of these little pens. You can probably get them at W.H. Smith, produced by Posca, and they produce a range of colors. And you have, we've talked about before, they call it a crown of thorns. And if you have a look, that this is the reality of one, and these little threads that go across are sprung. They're flexible, and so when you pop it down over the queen and she's held against them, there is some give. And you've got to remember that she is actually, she's got her exoskeleton. She's wandering around in a suit of armor, so she's well protected on the outside. You are unlikely to squash her, but you know, but they do flex, those little threads. You can do it using a catching cage, and there are moments you'll use queen cages to pop your queen in, and that's just an alternative which we show you there. So here we come, a queen marking. You have seen this before. So when you mark your queen, you don't have to do this, but there is an opportunity to mark her with a color which tells you which year she was marked in, or which year she was born in. So this queen is marked green, and it's a 5-year cycle of colors. It goes white, yellow, red, green, blue. There is a mnemonic for doing this. Will you raise good bees? So it's W for will, yellow U, R for red, and so on. So you can actually remember the mnemonic. So ours was a green one. And so she was a 2019 queen, and very nice she looks too. So this one's marked white. As I say, you don't have to actually follow that sequence of colors. And one of the great difficulties when you only got 1 or 2 hives is that you buy this pen and it's the right color and you use it that year and it doesn't come round again for 5 years. And by the time the 5 years come round, of course, it's dried up and useless. If you have a look at the queen, you'll notice just a small amount of one of her wings, just one, and a tiny amount is clipped off. And we will be talking about that in a tick. So this is the mnemonic. So that's the sequence of colors which you might like to follow. So queen clipping. What you're doing here is actually taking off a tiny bit of one wing. It creates an asymmetry. It means that they don't fly any distance. They may fly a little bit, but that they aren't going to go far. And it's a technique more used by people who've got a lot of hives, and it may not be something that you want to do when you first start. Although if you buy bees, the queen may well come clipped. And it just means that it is slightly more easy to manage the situation. I don't personally clip my queens, and I don't have a big problem. So I'm not saying you should clip your queens, but we're just mentioning that this is an option which some people use. So it's only a little bit of one wing. It might stop her from flying completely, but more often than not, she might be able to fly at just a small distance. And it helps with the management of swarming. But when they're going to swarm, if she rushes down the front entrance of the hive and flings herself in the air to fly off, of course she plops to the ground because she doesn't really fly, and so she can be lost in the long grass. So one of the things that beekeepers always like to see is that if you've got a frame of brood here, is that you can see that's a lovely big slab of sealed brood with very few holes, gaps, and that's something which you like to see. The queen is obviously laying incredibly efficiently, and it's evidence that she's a good queen. She's in her prime, and it's something which beekeepers really like to see. And perhaps sometimes if she's not in her prime, that you get at this much more patchy appearance, and it's not necessarily a huge problem, but you feel, well, it's not quite as good as the other, and it might reflect that she's getting that little bit elderly and isn't laying as regularly as she might have done in the past. So here's some nice brood, and obviously we've seen eggs. We've got the larvae, and I mean, this looks really lovely, healthy brood, lovely crystalline, pearly white. You can see the segmentation. They're all curled round neatly in their cells. They're all of different sizes. The smaller ones you can see, it all looks a bit wet down there. They're floating in a little sea of food, and that's really healthy looking brood. Oops, I'm just clicking and nothing much is happening. Right, swarming and swarming preparation. So you open up your hive, you take out a frame, and there you look on the bottom bar and you think, oh, goodness me, there is a whole load of queen cells. And you remember they hang down, they're this peanut shape, they got that lovely dimpled texture, and these ones are actually sealed at the end already. And there's a whole load of them. Now, when you get queen cells, it doesn't inevitably mean that the bees are trying to swarm. It may be that they're trying to replace the old queen, and that can be called supersedure. And it may even be that you've had an accident and you've squashed the queen, and they're emergency cells that they're desperately converted or have converted a worker cell into a queen cell in order to get back to the point where they've got a queen. If they are on the bottom bar like this, down there, it's most likely that they are true queens, swarm cells, and that they are endeavoring to swarm. And particularly when there's a whole load of them. I mean, there's a real load there. And so it wouldn't be long. They're already sealed. You probably remember they got sealed on the 9th day. They'll be out on the 16th. So within the next few days, there's going to quite possibly be a load of virgin queens out on the comb. So why do they swarm? Well, basically what they've got to do, of course, is because where they're a social insect, what they've got to do is to replicate a complete colony. It's not just a matter of producing more bees, and they've got to actually replicate the all queen, workers, drones, and fly off and make a new nest. One of the things, or some of the things, which tend to stimulate swarming is if there's overcrowding and overheating in the hive and the brood area. So one of the things when you're keeping your bees, you always try and do is just keep ahead of them, always give them that little bit more space than they need. It's better to gradually increase the space rather than just think you're going to put on a load of supers at the beginning of the spring and that will deal with it all. But so this is one of the other reasons why you regularly go through your colony. So if the queen, you remember, gives off this pheromone, queen substance, and if this then gets passed all around the hive and it tells all the bees that everything's okay, everything's as it should be. Sometimes when they're short of space and it's overcrowded, it's much more difficult to pass this pheromone around the hive. And this can be, you know, one of the reasons why you start the swarming impulse. And it may just be that the queen is getting older and she's just not as vigorous and producing as much as she has done in the past. And it also, if the bees, you know, just haven't got the space and they lack the opportunity to build new comb, then again, that can be another trigger. So it's all these things maybe working together. So you remember we talked about that it may be just the queen is getting old and not laying well, and the bees she's not producing her pheromone effectively, and they want to replace her. Now, if the queen cells are in the center of a frame towards the middle, and there may be two or three, then it's very likely that either it's a supersedure cell, in other words, something where they're trying to supersede the queen. And what they've had to do very often is to go to a worker cell with an egg in or a very young larvae, and it has to be very young, and they can actually build it out and produce this queen cell. So if it's in the center, it's very likely that they're actually trying to replace the queen without necessarily swarming, particularly if there aren't many of them. And also, if you've had an accident and you've squashed the queen or something funny has happened and she's just been killed, or you know, she's so injured that she's no longer functioning as a queen, then they will make those same sort of cells in the center, where they'll take an existing worker cell and modify them and turn them into queen cells. But if they're around the edge, as we can see these ones here along the bottom bar, it is very, very likely that they're swarm cells. But They might be emergency cells, but as I say, these emergency cells tend to be up in the middle. But an emergency is an emergency, and so they'll put them wherever they can find them to put, to turn into a queen cell. So what happens when bees swarm? Of course, the big thing is that what's got to happen is that obviously, first of all, they build some queen cells, and that the bees start actually changing in their behavior towards the queen. The workers, they start actually slimming her down. They don't feed her as well. They start bullying her, to be honest, is as good a way as to talk about it. They start nipping at her and jostling her and, as I say, and harassing her. And so they've got some queen cells on the go. And as I say, they've got to persuade the queen it's time to go. So they've got the queen cells, and usually it's when the queen cells are shortly after they're sealed that, if you like, the old queen more or less knows the writings on the wall, and if one of the new virgin queen comes out, they're going to fight to the death. And because the virgin queen is young and agile, that almost certainly the young queen is going to win. The old queen, therefore, has the opportunity of flying out. Probably for several days, the workers have been sending out scout bees to start the process of finding a new place to live. And so when the magic moment comes, usually it's about midday, it's on a nice day, particularly if it's warm and still, they will fly out, the queen and the workers, and they usually land reasonably close up in a tree or a bush. So there's a fair number of the bees that are able to fly, and they settle quite close. And the scout bees continue the process of finding their new permanent home. So it's likely that it's perhaps between a third and a half of the total colony that goes with the swarm. It'll vary a little bit. The first one out, when the colony is at its biggest, is called a prime swarm, and that's the one that everybody always wants. It's the first one out. It's usually in the spring, perhaps April, May time. And if you can run it into a hive, get it set up, you might even get a little bit of honey that year, but it's the one to get if you can. So there's been lots of stuff going on as well. Some bees have been out foraging, and so they will return to the hive and carry on with running the hive. They've got to feed such brood as is still there, and they got to rear these the new queens, and one of which will then take over as the new queen actually in that colony. So one way that you can get a colony is by using a bait hive. Now this is a hive, and they probably work best if you can get them up a bit. This is on a shed. Well, can you see there's a load of bees going in, and those are scout bees. They've found it. It's got a few combs in, and we'll explain about this in the practical course. And and then if we go on, the swarm has arrived. Remember, they first settled in a tree, say, and then when the scout bees have come to a fair consensus of what's the best home on offer, the swarm has flown there, and they're all moving in. So can we do anything to help to prevent swarming? Probably, we're just being a little bit hopeful. You're never going to completely solve it. But certainly if you can give plenty of space at appropriate times, that will help. And always allow them the opportunity to build clean new comb. And if you have young queens, then this is less likely to trigger all this process. And if you do feel that your bees are going to swarm, you can actually, and we'll talk about this on the practical course and go into it a lot further, you can artificially divide the colony either by making a nucleus, essentially you're splitting it in two, or an artificial swarm. But we will explain all about that, and it's much easier when you can actually see it going on. And also, if you've got an elderly queen, and you know, you can actually replace yourself, but we'll go into that at another time. So there's our friend the queen cell hanging down, bit of peanut-like, lovely dimpled surface, and then initially it's open so that they can feed the queen. Then it gets sealed. Got sealed on the 9th day. Remember that. Usually these things get sealed. Metamorphosis starts on the 9th day. And once it's sealed, that colony is going to swarm unless you actually do something. So if your queen cells are sealed, or if there's a queen cell that's opened with ragged edges and nothing in it, it means the virgin queen is out. She's already on the comb. You're too late. Nature is taking its course. There's a very good chance that the old queen has already flown and swarmed. So if you can find the old queen, she might still be there. And if so, you can do these things of an artificial swarm or a shook swarm, which is something we will, you know, be able to tell you if we can do the practical course. And if the swarm is left, it is a matter of damage limitation. Remove all but 2 of the queen cells. One, it's, if you like, it's just a little bit belt and braces, leaving 2. You could say, well, leave 1, but you tend to say leave 2. And there's our swarm up in a tree, and it's a handsome prime swarm, and you can see it's weighing the branch down where there's a good weight to it. And what you're going to do, it's not difficult to catch a swarm, particularly when it's in a nice sensible place like that. Largely, if you can actually get a box underneath and give it a shake and the swarm falls into it, so long as the queen is in there, all the other bees that haven't got in the box will actually go and join her. And but sometimes they're in difficult places. It's all done to embarrass you. So and of course when they do swarm, they then very often will go somewhere, set up home somewhere which is a real nuisance to someone, and you'll be periodically asked to see if perhaps you can't deal with bees that are living somewhere where it's really not terribly appropriate. I think this is one that Stu did. He took off that little vent, and there you can see the actual colony inside there, and you can see all the comb, and you can actually cut them out, tie it into frames, and get it into a hive, and you very often can save the colony. It's quite fun to do. So we just show you this, that when taking a swarm, you do really need to be prepared, and this is how not to do it. So we have a gentleman here on the left. He hasn't got his bee suit on. He's going to try and catch the swarm, which is up in the tree there, and There it is. So he's got shorts and t-shirt. He's got a piece of 3x2 timber, and he's going to put a bin liner onto the stick, and then, you know, hold it up and try and get the swarm in. And it really is a recipe for failure. Whereas if you can get a basket, a cardboard box will do. I've very often, traditionally, a skep, straw skep was used. If you can get it underneath, give a really good shake, the vast majority of the bees fall in. And then if you turn it the other way up, and this football is there just to keep it open a little bit so that the bees that haven't gone in can get in. And here's a hive, and this is one of the traditional ways of running them in, that you put a cloth up like that, and the cloth, the bees can actually grip to it quite nicely, and they will all march up into the hive. And it's an amazing thing. They just all want to march up, and virtually always it works very, very well. So a cast. These secondary swarms are smaller, and they get progressively smaller. So the second one out is about half the size of the first. The third one out is half the size of the second. And they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and their chances of survival get increasingly small. They're going to be led by a virgin queen, because of course the mated queen, the original queen, has gone out with the first swarm. And in a sense, that's handy. You know, you've got a brand new queen. You've got the danger that she's got to go out and mate and may get lost on a mating flight. But if she gets back, you've got a brand new queen, and the whole thing could build up very well. So if you wanted to prevent a cast, once you've got, you know, a queen in the hive, so you can remove all the other unsealed queen cells. And so once one is out, you can remove the others, and put some new foundation in the brood chamber, make it easy for them to work through their natural instincts to build new comb, and perhaps give them an extra bit of space. And you might even think, well, perhaps in future I'm going to think about clipping my queen, but that's, you know, a personal preference. I once up at Transition Bath almost got set upon by a load of animal rights people who said that beekeepers cut the wings off their queens, and we were horribly cruel. I said, well, actually, it's not something I do. I haven't actually done in 40-something years of beekeeping, and it slightly nonplussed them. Anyway, so I escaped with my life. And what we really would suggest is you get into the habit of keeping records. When you first start beekeeping, when you go and do your bees, you will find that, you know, it's all new and fresh, and everything you do is burnt into your psyche. But the honest truth is that after a little while, you'll forget exactly what you did on what day. So do keep records. And we are legally obliged to record doing certain things. If we use medicines under the veterinary medicines legislation, we must have a written record of it. And it's a good way to monitor hive activity. And you see trends in the hive over time. You can compare year on year. And so here's a sort of hive record that you might choose to use. Some people really like, you know, ticking boxes. or if you're like me, I like long flowing verbose sentences. So I'm not so good at the ticking boxes variety, but this is probably more economical. I'm just clicking away. Oh, there we go. So we were starting to fill it in. So we got the location when you started, got a hive number, and so a little record of the honey coming up in the spring and the summer. I may just do one line. So on the 21st of the 9th, so there are 8 combs of bees. 4 of them had got brood. So there were eggs, unsealed and sealed brood. Yeah, the brood looked lovely and healthy. Yeah, that looked okay too. Saw the queen? Yes. And they were good tempered, very good, which is always nice. You might want to mark them out of 10. Yeah, so yes, so that was sunny, 21 degrees and sunny. Were there still any drones about? Yeah, there are a few drones about. And so we actually treated them with some veterinary medicines, and that is what you have to put in, the amount of information that you have to give. You have to give the patch number, where you got it from, and what have you. So, summary, well done. You know, it's quite a lot to take in. We've looked at clothing, tools, thinking about our hive inspection. So a little bit of swarm prevention and control. What we might be looking for. This is where it gets exciting. Pest spreaders and diseases. Stuart doesn't like doing this one, but it's just worked out that it's his turn this year. That
you have.
Sorry?
2 years on the trot.
Oh, I don't believe it. So I usually try and do it because he doesn't like it. But these are some of the diseases and problems that you need to know about. Some of them you have legal obligations to know about them and what you have to do. So any questions? So I think we're going to stop sharing. You can see me now. So
I haven't got any written questions yet, Joe.
Right, so you're all numb.
Somebody did, earlier somebody did ask about using corn cobs in a smoker. And basically, if it burns and produces smoke rather than bursting into flames, then it's ideal.
Yeah, yes, I've never used too many myself, if largely because I haven't got that many corn cobs. But we've got something on chat. What's happening there?
I think Stu will be looking at that.
I've got nothing on chat.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, please do. Whoever said that.
Anne Barnett. Hello.
Hello, Anne.
I was just curious really about when the swarm goes off with the old queen. Clearly she's nearly at the end of her useful life. Do they then lay straight away more queens? I mean, how much longer has she got? It seems an odd thing to do, that all these bees follow this queen that isn't destined for very long in the world. Have I got that right?
Well, it might be like that, but if, say, you know, this is her second year, it might be that she's still really rather a good queen. It might even be that she's your favorite queen and you're now grinding your teeth and thinking, oh no, I've lost her because she was lovely. But obviously she doesn't go till there are sealed queen cells in the hive. So, you know, they've got their banker, if you like. They've already got queen cells.
Know, I was thinking more of the swarm that's gone off. And so if you were the recipient of this swarm to your new hive or whatever, you've got this elderly queen. How long is she likely to carry on? You know, does that mean that swarm is likely to produce queen cells pretty quickly?
It can sometimes. Yeah, if in fact, you know, she really is getting a little bit weary, then it may well be that although they'll draw out comb, she will start laying, and they may supersede her quite quickly.
Okay, yeah.
But if, you know, she settles down and is really going at it and laying well, then, you know, she's probably got, you know, perhaps several years. I mean, although we say queens might live to be 5, the reality is that most don't. That some people who are breeding queens who get a queen which they feel is particularly good and a strain that they particularly will encourage, you know, and they're regularly raising queens from her in a specialized queen rearing, they will actually keep their queens for a long time because she just genetically is what they really want to encourage. But actually in the cut and thrust of life in a hive, I mean, it's not very sentimental. You know, they don't love their mum. If her laying drops away, it's fairly brutal stuff. You know, that they will create queen cells and they will replace her.
There's a point there, someone, isn't there?
Thank you.
We've got 3 questions here, Joe.
Right. Sorry. Can I just say, Norbert has made the point.
Michelle Wilson.
Oh, sorry for Michelle. I do apologise. I read it wrong. Michelle is a nurse, and she made the point that it's really worth having antihistamine tablets. You know, in your medicine cabinet. It's Piriton is what you buy, and certainly we have. And you may want to, you know, keep it in with your beekeeping equipment. Just be a little bit aware that it can make you a bit sleepy, Piriton, if you've got to drive back home. But it is really good. Paul Harper, he's one of our very experienced beekeepers, is saying, do not clip a queen and until after she's mated and laying. And that, of course, is absolutely right, because if you clip her when she's a virgin queen, she can't effectively go out and mate then, and so, you know, you're absolutely stymied. So thank you, Paul. Billy Ashford has said, will I be able to be up and running and produce honey this season? The answer is possibly, because of course there are so many variables in that. If you were to say, I'm going to buy, you know, an existing colony and move it to wherever you want to move it, and we have a reasonable year, and honey, the amount of honey you get from a colony does vary from year to year. There's always, you know, there are good years, there are medium years, and there are, oh dear, sort of years where you think, oh gosh, that was sad, wasn't it? So yes, it is possible that you will get honey. If you were, say, to take get an early swarm in May and you build them up, that, you know, it's possible that you might get excess honey. And of course, but the big difficulty is if you start with a swarm, that they've got to build all this comb. They've then got to build the comb in the supers where they're going to store all this honey. And that is a very energy intense activity. They use a lot of honey when they convert it into wax. And so if you start, you know, from a swarm, you're probably, you can do it, but you'll probably be lucky to get much honey for your own use.
Ian Floyd.
Yeah, so Ian Floyd.
Read the question.
When you're inspecting frames, how long do you spend inspecting each frame? It's a very good question, because obviously there is always the risk that while you've got the frame out of the brood nest, that it may get cool, may even get chilled, and you don't want to really have the colony open too long. Now the difficulty, of course, is that certainly when you start, you're that little bit slower, and it's all very new and interesting. And very often when we're teaching sessions, we have the colonies open for really quite long periods of time, because you know we're teaching, and lots of people are interested. But so really the answer, and it's a little bit of an unsatisfactory one, is only have it open as long as is necessary. You know, what is it you're trying to achieve, and how long do you need to actually achieve that? Okay, so Nikki Bolton, will there be any opportunity to shadow help experienced beekeepers in the not too distant future? It all looks very overwhelming. Yeah, don't worry, the Samaritans have a special beekeeping apprentice hotline for people who, I can't go on, you know, but it will all become much clearer when we do it practically. This year, of course, is difficult for me to answer the question, in that we've got lockdown regulations, and therefore we are going to be have to be guided by actually what the government says we can do. Certainly, I would hope that with vaccination steaming ahead, and obviously beekeeping is an outside activity, that we may well be able to do some practical sessions. We may not be able to start as quickly as we would like, but what we try and do, if we possibly can, for those that are starting, is provide them with mentors. We can't promise, because obviously we don't know exactly where every one of you lives, and whether there's one of our members, you know, sufficiently close to you for them to be practically able to do it. And of course, the difficulty this year is that we will have to be very led by what the government says about, you know, how many people can meet and that sort of thing. But our aspiration is always to provide you with, you know, practical assistance, and that you know, both the practical course, and hopefully that with someone that could mentor you, and you can cry on their shoulder, and you know, have a generally nice time together. So Sandra Calvert, when should we be looking at ordering equipment and bees if we want to go ahead this year? I think probably what you want to do is perhaps ring us up and have a chat with Stu or I, and what we need to do is you know, to see exactly how you want to start, and if it's a matter of, you know, buying equipment and buying bees, then you know, you probably want to place your order as soon as you reasonably can. The bees aren't necessarily going to be ready, or it won't be appropriate for you to pick them up and move them to your apiary instantly, particularly not on the weather as it is at the moment. But if you're seriously thinking, well, I really think I'm going to do this, I'm going to go for it, then give, you know, either Stuart or I a ring, and we'll talk about the practicalities. There are just too many variables to answer you on this evening. Right, so Duncan Moore, you mentioned reducing the number of queen cells to 2. What happens to the others? Well, it depends.
You, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a choice. If you do nothing, there's a chance that a load of virgin queens will be out on the comb, and you will just, there is a chance that you will just have swarm after swarm after swarm after swarm after swarm. Each one is getting progressively smaller and less more likely to succeed. I think the idea is the suggestion from Tom Seeley, who we talked about earlier, Professor Tom Seeley. His work suggests that a swarm in its first winter admittedly his research work is done in the USA. 75% of them will die in their first winter if they're feral colonies, you know, out in the wild. So basically, once the old queen has gone, you reduce the cells down to 2.
But what do you do with the other cells?
Hang on. Sorry, I have someone interrupting me, sitting beside me. The thing is that obviously, if you're a risk taker, if the cells are unsealed, you can look up into it and check that there is actually a nice fat larva in a great puddle of queen jelly, royal jelly, and you could leave just one if you're a risk taker. If you're a little bit belt and braces like me, you tend to leave 2, particularly if they're sealed, because you don't actually know what's in each of those sealed, 2 sealed. Now the rest of the cells, you could, if you've got a number of colonies, make up nuclei. These are small breeder units, and you could put 1 or 2 of those cells actually into the breeder units. And if they're a strain of bee that you want to you know, continue and breed from. Otherwise, the honest, frank truth, and I may get set on by the animal rights people again, and I hope no one is from them this evening. You just squash them.
There is one other alternative, Joe, that quite often other people in the beekeeping fraternity are looking for a queen cell. You could be able to give it to somebody.
No, absolutely right. I mean, sometimes that there are moments when you're, particularly if it's from a good strain, that other beekeepers that are trying to build up their colonies and are setting up some nukes might be interested. So yes, thank you, Stu. So Helen Reed. Can you preemptively move frames to a new hive once they've been sealed to avoid swarming? No, it doesn't quite work like that. They need to sort of go through their natural process. What you can do is move frames to a new hive. In other words, split the colony into 2, and it's called an artificial swarm or making a nucleus. So you can do that, but if you were just to move the old colony to a new hive, you know, just take the frames across, the bees wouldn't necessarily think, oh, we've done that, we're in a new place, we're not going to swarm. So Helen, does that answer your question? I can't see Helen at the moment, sorry.
Actually, that's very close. You know, Helen's idea is getting dangerously close to doing an artificial swarm.
Yeah, I mean, we will be describing the process of doing an artificial swarm. Right, so from Belinda, how can you tell the smoker has fully done its job? Well, basically, as I say, when you puff some smoke in the entrance, if you give it about a dozen puffs, and then you leave it for a minute or 2 for it to, you know, percolate round the hive, that there isn't, you know, a gratifying sign which tells you, oh, it's okay now, you know, they've all gone dozy. But if you just, you know, sort of give them a couple of minutes, you'll quite often see beekeepers, you know, who've been doing it a bit. They give a few puffs and just take the lid off, and they don't really give it enough time to have effect. So Nikki Bolton is asking, regarding bee suits, are they available in different lengths? They are, but it's more a case of different sizes, small, medium and large and extra large. And obviously the lengths do vary with that. There are sort of children's ones as well, if you've got youngsters who are interested.
We will do special cuts, Joe, for people who are exceptionally tall.
Right. So sorry, Nikki, I won't ask you to stand up, but if you are extra tall, then we can probably organise it. So I can't see your picture at the moment.
Paul.
So Paul Chowns. So if you have European foul brood, do you have to report this? If so, who to? Yeah, there is quite clear legislation on this, and you have a legal obligation to report it to the bee inspectorate, who are officers of DEFRA. Simon Jones is our regional bee inspector. He's down in Taunton, and the bee inspectors, far from being your enemy, are your friends. They're all extremely nice people, extremely helpful, and no doubt, you know, when you've got your bees, you will meet them in a normal year, not because you've got foul brood, but you know that they're out and about. They go to a lot of beekeeping events. They run advice stalls, and they're really helpful people. And so yes, but you have a legal obligation. And obviously, if you think, well, I don't know, how do I contact it? You can always contact Stu or I or any other. And
Becky.
so Becky, regarding the site of a hive, do bees mind if you mow your lawn near the hive? And do the bees mind the pet dog? Now, you may find it's the other way around. The pet dog may mind the bees, but the great thing about being stung is that dogs are, you know, are quick learners, and they will very quickly develop a very healthy respect for your bees. And yes, if you have, you know, your bees and they're on the lawn, you may find it's very helpful to put it on a couple of paving slabs, or you know, you can put some membrane down so you don't have to, you know, mow right up to the hive. Having said that, you know, this last summer I've got 3 little hives in the garden, and I was mowing right up to them, and that was fine. But
That's all.
so, okay. So someone's just saying.
It's all the questions.
Joe,
Hi, Eric.
beehives and lawn mowing, you can always wear your bee suit to mow the lawn near the hives. I know it looks a bit odd, but it protects you fairly well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, so you know, you've always got that to fall back on, that you, if you're at least a bit worried, if it's a really hot day and they appear they're a bit active or a bit miserable, you know, because it's thundery or something, and you think, oh, I must just get the lawn mown. So Garth, can you buy different varieties of bees, such as Cornish black bees, or is it a no-no? Yes. You, Garth, by all means, get drawn into the black bee community. I look after 4 hives of black, supposedly black bees down at Worthy Farm, where the Pot Festival is, and they got black bees. They're about as black as I am, and but if you get down to the Cornish bees, there's a very good chap there, Nick Bentham Green, who heads up the Black Bee Project. The great difficulty about the Black Bee Project is that, as we talked about briefly on the other session I did, that the British black bee was here for thousands of years, and then about 100 years ago there was a disease which started in the Isle of Wight, and it almost you know, wiped them out. And so lots of foreign bees were imported, and so our bees are mongrels now. And so although there were these some areas of the country, perhaps that were more isolated, where they felt that there were strains of bees which often tended to be blacker, that perhaps you could breed back to the original black bee. And if you really get into it, it's quite complex because they're looking at the venation in the veins in the wings, because, you know, they had slightly characteristic, and obviously they looked at bees that were preserved 100 years ago and studying the angles that the veins in the wings make and what have you. And if you really get into it, it's fairly obsessional stuff. The great problem is, of course, once you buy your black bees from down in Cornwall, that's fine. But since all the drones in your area aren't going to be black bees, the next generation, the F1 generation, is going to be 50% black bees. The next generation is probably going to be, you know, 25% black bees. And unless you actually are endlessly getting black bees, more black bees, or what you can do if you make up breeding nukes, I know what Nick does, you can take your breeding nukes down to Cornwall to their breeding stations where the percentage of black bees is much higher, but you have to work very, very hard at it to be able to keep the strain true. And certainly the experience of the ones that I took over looking after a Worthy farm, as I say, they're about as black as me. Catherine, do you lose most swarms, or is it possible to catch your own swarms? And if you don't,
No.
and if so, don't you end up with more and more colonies and hives? Absolutely right. We go off down to Buckfast Abbey most years, COVID-free years, and there's the lady who runs the bees at Buckfast Abbey now, Claire Densley. She's an absolute delight, and one of the people that she's associated with, he actually started with, you know, a hive or two, and because he's never really quite got a grip on swarm control, and he's got a swarmy strain of bees. I think he's up to about 50 hives now. So, you know, it can get a bit hard work. So you will lose a few swarms, but if you encourage your bees, if you selectively tend to breed from the bees which are less swarmy, eventually, you know, you have bees which don't swarm all that amount. I mean, my own bees are incredibly boring because they hardly swarm, just because over the years I've always selected from those that are least swarmy. But Stu and I had quite some fun over the summer, didn't we? We went out and caught some swarms together. And
we've never repeated the dancing around the hive in a nightdress episode, have we?
Oh no! Chris. One of the things when we talked about hive tools, we've put its alternative name in as a bee spanner, and the reason is, and Chris, my wife, who helped with the layout a bit, thought that this was a bit frivolous because Stu and I went to a very nice lady who'd got a problem and a swarm in her garden. She got bees, but she got a broken wrist, and very, very nice South African lady, and made us terribly welcome. And for some reason, even though it was mid-afternoon, she was frisking round her garden in a nightie and house coat and trying to talk to us in Afrikaans, which, you know, isn't one of our stronger points. But and then she'd have to start translating. But then when she saw our hive tours, she announced that these were bee spanners. And Stu and I, you know, fell about laughing at the thought of such a thing as a bee spanner. And so you'll often hear us talk about bee spanners, and then you'll never quite understand why we fall about laughing. But it's just such a nice idea, a bee spanner. So, you know, call your hive tool a bee spanner and join the club. Right.
No more questions at the moment.
No, I think I've numbed you into a torpor. No more questions coming at the moment.